ES Audio.
Hello, I'm Nick Curtis, the Evening Standard's Chief Theatre Critic. Welcome back to our theatre podcast. This week I'm joined by Nancy Durrant, the Evening Standard's Culture Editor. Coming up shortly, we'll be looking at Best of Enemies at the Noël Coward Theatre, but we're going to kick off with Othello at the National Theatre.
It gives me wonder, great as my content, to see thee here before me.
Rather incredibly, this is the first production of Othello to be directed by a black director at the National Theatre. It's directed by Clint Dyer, who is now also Associate Director of the whole South Bank Institution with Rufus Norris, and I think we all agree this is a belated and good thing. It stars Giles Terera as Shakespeare's Moor, extraordinary actor who I've followed for decades. I think I saw his stage debut at Battersea Arts Centre in a production of The Tempest in the early 90s. But more recently, he was wonderful as Aaron Burr in the British premiere of Hamilton. He was just as wonderful in Blues from an Alabama Sky. But now he is playing Othello at the National. I thought it was rather wonderful. What did you think?
I thought it was one of the best Othellos I've seen, actually. It's a really difficult play to watch.
Yes.
But I'm really glad I saw this one. I have a quite a kind of complex relationship with this play. Right up until just before the interval, every interaction that you see with Othello and Desdemona just makes you hope for them. It kind of makes you love them. It makes you care about their love. It makes you believe in it. And then just before the interval, you see Iago plant the seed of doubt. And from that moment, all you can hear in your head is this tick, 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 until the bomb goes off. And you know it's going to go off. And the inevitability of it is horrendous.
Yes, yeah. And this one is particularly stark and harsh, I think it's fair to say. And there's a very, very singular focus on Othello's race. Recent productions have slightly tempered it or slightly sort of played with the concept of it. There was a production at Shakespeare's Globe recently where Iago's wife was black, played by Sheila Etim. You know, and Iago was played by Mark Rylance, who was a much older man, so it added different layers to the dynamics of the play. Whereas here, he very clearly is the one black man in an all-white, rather fascist society. The set is arranged on three sides, on a sort of set of steps on three sides. So it feels slightly like a Roman forum, but also slightly like a gladiatorial arena or a fascist gathering place. And in the first sequence, there's a very real suggestion that he might be about to be lynched. You know, they're carrying ropes and they're calling for his death, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, so it's not at all subtle, but it's not. No. It really leans into his otherness.
Yes,
he was explaining why it was that Desdemona had fallen in love with him, and he says it's because he was telling his story about his life and his youth and his difficulties, and he says the words "sold into slavery," and I thought, oh, is that normally in it? I don't remember hearing it before.
Yes. And
I heard it very clearly this time. And there are other bits where you just you hear it in a different way.
One of the things I really liked about Terera's performance is that there tends to be a sort of tendency to have quite macho martial Othellos, these sort of big soldier figures. I think there's possibly a sort of hangover of even Paul Robeson's performance, you know, back in the day, of this sort of booming martial figure. Olivier did it too. Terera has actually quite a sort of gentle fluting voice, which really brings out the poetry and the affection that he has for Desdemona and the sensitivity in the character as well, I think, rather than this sort of warlike being.
Yeah, he's a very humane Othello and a very human Othello. He's not a caricature of anything, you know, and actually you can play him a little bit like the sort of archetypical noble Moor figure. This is a guy. This is a guy who's fallen in love and doesn't really know how to deal with it because he's just a soldier and he's been through a lot, and you know. And
it makes his sort of unbalancement by Iago, or by the thought of Desdemona's infidelity. I liked Rosie McEwen's Desdemona as well. She was one of the strongest I've ever seen. Very forceful, very interestingly sort of placed in the action.
Wherein I mean to touch your love indeed, it shall be full of poise and difficult weight, and fearful to be granted.
I will deny thee nothing. Whereon I do beseech thee, grant me this, to leave me but a little to myself.
What shall I deny you?
She was a super intelligent young woman and forthright and courageous, you know, not just sort of courageous in love, which I think you can kind of attribute to somebody being, you know, young and impetuous. She's an intelligent woman who knows what she wants and is prepared to take a risk to get it.
Has made what is in this society a very brave decision.
Incredible.
A very strong-willed decision.
You really liked Iago's performance as well, didn't you?
Yeah, Paul Hilton as Iago. He's quite over the top almost, but he's almost sort of carnivalesque in the way that he sort of worms his way into Othello's mind.
He's always got that sort of kind of sweaty jitteriness, though, anyway, hasn't he, Paul Hilton? Like, that's kind of his niche, if you like.
Yes, and he does look a lot like a young Oswald Mosley here, which is, you know... Yes.
I also really loved Tanya Franks as Amelia.
Mm-hmm.
It's a portrayal done in a way I haven't seen before. Amelia is Iago's wife, and she is very clearly in this context a woman in a violently controlling marriage.
Yes.
He's very jealous, and he plays with her fear visibly, and it's really unpleasant to watch. The scene between her and Desdemona, when Othello has lost his temper with Desdemona and told her to go to bed, they discuss whether or not a woman could ever cheat on her husband. And it's the best I've seen it done.
Yes, absolutely.
I think, because quite often that scene, you know, Desdemona's very sad and she's very kind of wistful and can't quite understand what's going on. But Amelia is often paid as a little bit sort of bitter but larky.
Yes.
In this version, she is angry and despairing.
Yes.
It's clear that she's responding to her husband's jealousy and his ill treatment of her, but she knows that she is trapped.
Yes.
And it's incredibly affecting.
It's very moving, very, very, very well textured, that scene, I think.
Yeah, I think it's definitely the best I've seen that scene.
It makes the final tragedy all the more sort of bitter and awful. I think if this was the first Othello you'd seen, you would get the play and be moved by it in a way that you might not have done by previous productions.
And in fact, I can tell you that that is the case, because the person I took with me had never, to her remembrance, seen Othello before.
Yes.
And she thought it was wonderful.
Yes.
She really loved it.
I just wanted to make a note about the opening, where a series of dates and images scroll down, and they're of previous productions. And I think it's quite a bold and important statement in saying, this is how we do Othello now. I gave it 4 stars out of 5. This is not a reflection on the quality of the production. I've only, I think, given 3 5-star reviews in my career, maybe 4.
You meanie.
I know, but something has to be just about perfect. And I think this is pretty damn close. I mean, it's a really, really terrific, strong, shocking production.
Yeah.
Let's go to the ads. In the second half, we'll be discussing Best of Enemies at the Noël Coward Theatre. We'll be back after this.
Welcome back to the Evening Standard Theatre podcast. Before we go into talking about Best of Enemies, this is a very exciting week for us at the Evening Standard, isn't it, Nick?
It certainly is. If you are listening to this podcast when it drops on Sunday, in a few hours' time, we will be announcing the 66th Evening Standard Theatre Awards. They're back after 2 years of COVID-induced delay, and I can't obviously tell you who's won yet, but they are an extremely exciting roster of winners. I'm very pleased with the people who are being recognised. And if you're listening to this podcast later in the week, you can, of course, go online right now and find out who they are.
So exciting.
Best of Enemies at the Noël Coward Theatre. This is James Graham's play transferred from the Young Vic. It basically traces back our current adversarial climate of political debate to the 1968 TV discussions between William F. Buckley Jr., a right-wing polemicist at the time, and Gore Vidal, a sort of urbane, gay commentator on the liberal left. They were put together by ABC News, who were the least powerful and least popular of the 3 major networks, during the presidential debates where the Republican and the Democrat parties were choosing their candidates, the idea being that they would sort of elevate what was fairly boring factual news. That ain't what happened, is it?
Not exactly what you call elevation, no. It's such a great play.
Absolutely wonderful. I think it's actually got better in the transfer. I don't know whether James Graham has. I think he's possibly worked on it a little tiny bit. Somehow it seemed just that bit tighter and richer and deeper than it was even at the Young Vic, and I loved it at the Young Vic.
Obviously it's been slightly reduced in its design because at the Young Vic it was sort of not exactly in the round, but it was sort of in the semicircle, wasn't it?
Yes. I think in the Young Vic you sort of felt you were in a TV studio. You felt you were part of the audience or part of the sort of production that was going on in here.
David Harewood plays William F. Buckley.
Yes.
And
played him at the Young Vic as
and
well.
played him at the Young
he's
Vic.
continued in the role.
Exactly. And then there's Zachary Quinto, who is new to the role of Gore Vidal.
Yes.
And I think he is great. I think he makes an excellent Gore Vidal.
He shows you what a sort of awful narcissist Gore Vidal really was, and a terrible person.
Completely ghastly, but he's got that sort of coolness.
And people talked about Vidal being feline. I thought he was quite sort of serpentine in this one. It made me understand why some people keep snakes as pets. I mean, there's something there's something very sort of cold-blooded about him in this. But I mean, Harewood is extraordinary in this.
Yeah.
He came back to the UK to do this play after years in America doing Homeland and Supergirl and things like that. And my God, we've missed him.
Yeah.
God, he's a riveting actor.
He is so good.
He is a black actor, and he is here playing a very white, right-wing conservative commentator. I mean, not a sort of radical Tea Party type that we're used to now.
Yeah.
He's more of a sort of patrician, old-school flag and scotch.
Yeah, quite. I mean, I think
Republican.
patrician is a really good word. He's got a pompousness.
Yes.
He sort of wields a pompousness, which is incredibly enjoyable to watch. But I think that's interesting with James Graham, his decision to make Buckley likeable, because his interest is he didn't want, I think, to make it. The theatre like audience is full of old mostly and some less old lefties.
Yes.
And I think he wanted to challenge people on the way that you see these people.
I think
you agree with Gore Vidal, but you think he's an arse.
Yes.
When you don't agree with Buckley, but he and his wife have a lovely relationship.
They have a lovely relationship, and they call each other Ducky, which I love. It's
so
absolutely wonderful.
cute.
And he does emerge with dignity. You sense that there's an explosive exchange towards the end, which we won't spoil for people.
One of the things that the play exhibits for me is that for both of these men, they are in a bubble of their own, of two different kinds, and politics for them is a kind of game.
Yes.
It is, however deeply they believe it, their instinct is to play it. At one time, it was only possible to manipulate public opinion locally. Television changed that.
Yes.
And this is the moment, effectively, when that changed. But look ahead, it has nothing on the communication technology we have now, which is precisely why it looks so ugly, because it is susceptible to it.
Well, thank God for theatre, which can explore things in sort of greater delicacy and detail. One thing I did want to say about Harewood is much is made of Buckley's facial tics, the way he licks his lips, the way he does things, and Harewood manages to do this without it being a caricature, which I just think is amazing.
Yeah, exactly. You sort of slowly start to notice it rather than going like, God, that man's weird.
And again, it's Graham lighting on incidental detail. I love the fact that we get more of James Baldwin in this play than we do of Andy Warhol, who appears.
Yes.
And I was actually timing it. I have a feeling Andy Warhol might be only on stage or speaking for 15 seconds, which would be a lovely play on the 15 minutes of fame thing, if it's true. So, James Graham, if you're listening to this, could you confirm or deny that you are that clever? It's very funny, this play as well.
Very funny.
It's absolutely on the button in terms of what it's saying about contemporary attitudes and their historical precedents.
Never loses pace.
Never loses pace. Very funny, very pacey. This is one of the rare productions that I gave 5 stars out of 5 because I really could not fault it. I really think it's a tremendous, smart, entertaining, clever night at the theatre.
Yeah, I think if anyone is thinking of trying to go and see something this Christmas, then this is the one I would say if you want a genuinely brilliant show.
You've been listening to the Evening Standard Theatre podcast. To see all of our theatre and other arts coverage, go to standard.co.uk/culture. I'm Nick Curtis.
And I'm Nancy Durrant.
And we will see you next week.